The year is 1453, and you're crouched behind silk curtains in the most opulent palace the world has ever seen, watching as servants debate whether the Sultan's morning tea should be served in a cup made from rhinoceros horn, or one crafted from jade blessed by 7 different holy men. This isn't a casual breakfast decision. This is a matter of imperial destiny that could determine whether the Ottoman Empire conquers new territories or faces divine punishment for offending cosmic forces beyond human understanding. You're witnessing the hidden world of Ottoman palace traditions, where the most powerful rulers in 3 continents lived, according to rules so elaborate and bizarre that they would make modern royalty seem practically casual by comparison. These weren't just customs or cultural preferences. These were sacred obligations that transformed every moment of imperial life into a carefully choreographed performance, where a single mistake could mean exile, execution, or worse, the collapse of divine favor that kept the empire intact. Before we dive into these forgotten rituals that governed the Ottoman court, if you're fascinated by the secret histories that shaped our world, smash that like button and subscribe for more hidden stories from the past. And drop a comment letting me know which historical empire you'd want to explore next. It's incredible that we can journey together through these ancient corridors of power, connected across centuries by our shared curiosity about how absolute authority actually worked behind closed doors. The first tradition that defined Ottoman court life was perhaps the most psychologically demanding of all. The Sultan was required to maintain what court officials called the ritual of perpetual awareness, a practice that meant he could never appear surprised, confused, or unprepared in the presence of his subjects. This wasn't about maintaining dignity or political composure. This was about preserving the supernatural mystique that convinced millions of people across 3 continents that their ruler possessed divine knowledge of all earthly affairs. Every morning, teams of palace informants would brief the Sultan on hundreds of seemingly insignificant details from across his vast empire. The color of flowers blooming in Damascus gardens, the dreams reported by merchants in Cairo, the migration patterns of birds observed over Bulgarian villages. Nothing was too small or seemingly irrelevant, because the Sultan needed to demonstrate omniscient awareness of his realm's most minute details. But here's where this tradition becomes truly fascinating. The Sultan wasn't just memorizing random facts. Court philosophers had developed elaborate theories connecting these tiny details to larger cosmic patterns that supposedly revealed divine will. A change in bird migration might predict military threats. Unusual dream reports could indicate brewing rebellions. Even the timing of flower blooms was analyzed for its implications regarding harvest yields and tax revenues. The psychological pressure was extraordinary. Imagine governing an empire that stretched from Eastern Europe to North Africa, while simultaneously trying to remember whether the fishermen of Trebizond had reported unusual weather patterns 3 weeks ago. The Sultan's mind became a vast database of seemingly unrelated information that he was expected to synthesize into wise policy decisions on demand. The second tradition involved the elaborate protocols surrounding imperial meals, and it reveals how Ottoman rulers transformed basic human needs into complex religious ceremonies. The Sultan could never simply eat food because he was hungry or because something looked appealing. Instead, every meal had to be planned according to astrological calculations, religious requirements, and political symbolism that turned dining into a form of statecraft. Court nutritionists worked with Islamic scholars and palace astronomers to design menus that balanced the Sultan's physical health with his spiritual purity and his empire's cosmic alignment. Different foods were believed to influence different aspects of imperial decision-making. Lamb prepared with specific spices might enhance military judgment. Honey from particular regions could improve diplomatic wisdom. Even the timing of meals was calculated to coincide with favorable planetary positions. The preparation process was incredibly elaborate. Ingredients had to be sourced from approved regions where local religious authorities had blessed the soil. Cooks underwent purification rituals before handling imperial food. Every dish was tasted by multiple specialists who analyzed not just for poison, but for spiritual contamination that might compromise the Sultan's divine connection. But the true complexity lay in the serving ceremonies. The Sultan couldn't simply sit down and eat. Instead, meals became theatrical performances involving dozens of participants who each played specific roles in maintaining cosmic harmony. Servants arranged dishes according to geometric patterns that supposedly channeled divine energy. Musicians played compositions designed to aid digestion and enhance spiritual receptivity. Even the Sultan's eating utensils were selected based on astrological considerations and religious symbolism. The third tradition governed the Sultan's daily wardrobe selections, transforming personal clothing choices into complex political communications that required teams of specialists to coordinate. The Ottoman ruler couldn't wake up and simply put on clothes that felt comfortable or looked attractive. Instead, every garment had to be chosen according to elaborate calculations that considered the day's scheduled activities, current political circumstances, religious obligations, and the symbolic messages that different fabrics and colors would convey to various audiences. Palace fashion advisors maintained detailed records of what the Sultan had worn during previous diplomatic meetings, religious ceremonies, and military consultations. No combination of garments could be repeated within specific time periods, because repetition might suggest lack of imperial resources or insufficient attention to cosmic variety that kept divine favor flowing toward the empire. The decision-making process involved multiple consultations each morning. Religious scholars analyzed which colors and patterns would be most appropriate for the day's spiritual obligations. Political advisors considered what messages different clothing choices would send to foreign ambassadors or domestic officials. Even court physicians weighed in on how different fabrics might affect the Sultan's health and energy levels throughout his demanding daily schedule. The psychological impact was profound. The Sultan couldn't express personal preferences or individual tastes through his clothing. Instead, his body became a canvas for displaying imperial policy and religious devotion, but he had minimal control over how that canvas was decorated. His most intimate daily decisions were made by committees of specialists who prioritized institutional needs over personal comfort or individual expression. The fourth tradition involved the elaborate ceremonies surrounding the Sultan's daily correspondence, and it demonstrates how Ottoman bureaucracy transformed simple communication into complex religious and political rituals. The ruler couldn't simply read letters or write responses according to his personal schedule or immediate priorities. Instead, all imperial correspondence had to be processed according to intricate protocols that treated written communication as a form of sacred activity requiring special preparation and divine blessing. Every morning, court secretaries would organize incoming letters according to elaborate classification systems that considered not just their political importance, but their spiritual implications and cosmic timing. Messages from different regions were believed to carry different types of energy that could influence imperial decision-making. Correspondence that arrived during favorable astrological periods received priority attention, while letters that came during inauspicious times might be delayed until cosmic conditions improved. The Sultan couldn't simply read these communications privately. Instead, court scholars had to be present during all correspondence review sessions to provide commentary on the religious and political implications of each message. These weren't casual consultations, they were formal analysis sessions where the Sultan's reactions to different letters were monitored and recorded for future reference. Writing responses was even more complex. The Sultan's words carried such enormous political weight that teams of specialists had to collaborate on crafting replies that balanced diplomatic necessity with religious obligation and imperial dignity. Every phrase was analyzed for its potential interpretations. Every word choice was evaluated for its spiritual and political implications. The fifth tradition governed the Sultan's interaction with palace animals. revealing how Ottoman court culture extended elaborate protocols even to relationships with creatures that served various ceremonial and practical functions throughout the imperial complex. The ruler couldn't simply pet a cat or feed birds in palace gardens according to personal whim or natural affection. Instead, every interaction with animals required specific rituals that treated these creatures as potential channels for divine communication and cosmic intelligence. Palace veterinarians worked alongside court mystics to interpret the behavior of imperial pets, hunting birds, and ceremonial horses for signs that might reveal divine guidance about political decisions or military campaigns. The most elaborate protocols surrounded the Sultan's relationship with his hunting falcons, magnificent birds that served not just as sporting companions, but as living symbols of imperial power and divine favor. Each falcon underwent elaborate blessing ceremonies conducted by specially trained religious authorities who believed these creatures could carry prayers directly to heaven and return with celestial wisdom embedded in their flight patterns and hunting behaviors. Training sessions became religious ceremonies where the Sultan's interaction with his birds was monitored by court officials who recorded every gesture, every command, every moment of connection between ruler and falcon. These observations were compiled into detailed reports that palace scholars analyzed for insights into the Sultan's spiritual condition and his empire's cosmic alignment. But the true psychological burden came from the belief that animals could sense divine displeasure with imperial policies. If a falcon refused to hunt or a palace horse showed signs of distress, court advisors would interpret these behaviors as warnings that the Sultan needed to reconsider recent decisions or perform additional purification rituals to restore cosmic harmony. The sixth tradition involved the Sultan's daily exercise routines, transforming physical fitness into elaborate ceremonies that combined health maintenance with religious devotion and political symbolism. The Ottoman ruler couldn't simply go for walks or engage in physical activities that felt natural or enjoyable. Instead, every movement had to be choreographed according to complex theories that connected bodily health with imperial strength and divine blessing. Court physicians developed intricate exercise programs that balanced Islamic principles with ancient Greek medical theories and Persian mystical traditions. Different physical activities were prescribed for different times of day, seasons, and political circumstances. The Sultan's body became a carefully maintained instrument of imperial power that required constant professional attention and spiritual oversight. Morning exercises might involve specific stretching routines designed to align the Sultan's physical energy with favorable cosmic forces. Afternoon activities could include martial arts practice that served both fitness and symbolic purposes, demonstrating imperial strength to potential enemies while maintaining the ruler's combat readiness. Evening routines often incorporated meditative movements that supposedly enhanced spiritual receptivity and divine connection. But the Sultan couldn't exercise alone. Teams of specialists monitored every session, recording his physical responses and analyzing them for insights into his overall health and spiritual condition. Palace guards provided security, while religious advisors ensured that all activities complied with Islamic principles. Even the Sultan's breathing patterns during exercise were studied for their potential political and spiritual implications. The seventh tradition governed the Sultan's relationship with palace gardens, revealing how Ottoman culture transformed natural spaces into complex symbolic environments that required constant interpretation and spiritual maintenance. The ruler couldn't simply enjoy beautiful flowers or peaceful walks through imperial grounds according to personal preference or momentary mood. Instead, palace gardens were designed according to elaborate mystical principles that treated different plants, pathways, and water features as components of a vast cosmic diagram that supposedly channeled divine energy toward the empire's center. Court botanists worked with religious scholars and political advisors to ensure that every garden element contributed to maintaining imperial power and spiritual purity. The Sultan's garden visits became formal ceremonies involving multiple specialists who guided his movements through these sacred spaces. Different pathways were designated for different types of contemplation. Specific flowers were associated with particular prayers or political considerations. Even the timing of garden visits had to be calculated according to astrological conditions and religious obligations. Palace gardeners underwent elaborate training that combined horticultural knowledge with spiritual education and political awareness. They weren't simply maintaining beautiful landscapes. They were tending to living symbols of imperial power that could influence the empire's destiny through their health, arrangement, and seasonal changes. The eighth tradition involved the Sultan's daily bathing rituals, transforming basic hygiene into elaborate purification ceremonies that consumed hours of time and required the coordination of dozens of specialists. The Ottoman ruler couldn't simply wash himself efficiently and move on to other activities. Instead, bathing became a complex religious and political performance that treated the Sultan's body as a sacred vessel, requiring special care and spiritual attention. The preparation process began long before the Sultan entered his bathing chambers. Court officials had to ensure that water came from approved sources that had been blessed by religious authorities. Different types of water were mixed according to mystical formulas that supposedly enhanced physical cleansing, while providing spiritual purification and cosmic protection. Bathing attendants underwent extensive training that combined practical skills with religious education and political awareness. They weren't simply helping the Sultan maintain cleanliness. They were participating in sacred rituals that supposedly maintained the empire's divine favor through proper care of their ruler's physical form. The bathing process itself involved multiple stages, each with specific prayers, procedures, and symbolic requirements. Different soaps and oils were applied according to elaborate schedules that considered the Sultan's health, the empire's political situation, and current astrological conditions. Even the temperature of the water had to be calculated according to medical theories and religious principles that treated physical comfort as secondary to spiritual and political considerations. The ninth tradition concerned the Sultan's evening entertainment, and it reveals how Ottoman court culture transformed leisure into elaborate educational exercises that served both political and spiritual purposes. The ruler couldn't simply relax after exhausting days of governing his vast empire. Instead, his entertainment had to be carefully curated by court scholars who selected activities that would enhance his wisdom, demonstrate imperial grandeur, and maintain proper religious observance. Palace musicians weren't permitted to play whatever compositions they found beautiful or technically impressive. Instead, they had to perform pieces that had been approved by committees of religious authorities and political advisors, who analyzed each melody for its spiritual implications and symbolic messages. Different musical modes were believed to influence the Sultan's decision-making abilities in specific ways. Certain rhythms supposedly enhanced military judgment, while others improved diplomatic sensitivity. The selection process was incredibly complex. Court musicologists maintained detailed catalogues of approved compositions, organized according to their intended effects on imperial consciousness. Evening concerts became therapeutic sessions, where music was prescribed like medicine to address the Sultan's current political challenges and spiritual needs. But the true psychological burden lay in the performative nature of these entertainments. The Sultan couldn't simply enjoy music as a private individual seeking relaxation after demanding responsibilities. Instead, he had to participate in elaborate ceremonies where his reactions to different performances were monitored and interpreted by court officials who treated his aesthetic responses as indicators of his fitness for continued rule. The 10th tradition governed the Sultan's interaction with visiting dignitaries, transforming diplomatic meetings into theatrical productions that required months of preparation and involved hundreds of palace specialists. Foreign ambassadors couldn't simply request audiences and discuss political matters in straightforward conversations. Instead, every diplomatic encounter had to be choreographed according to elaborate protocols that demonstrated Ottoman superiority while maintaining cosmic harmony. The preparation process began weeks before scheduled meetings. Court officials had to research the visiting dignitary's cultural background, religious beliefs, and political objectives to design appropriate reception ceremonies. Palace decorators would rearrange entire chambers according to symbolic principles that supposedly influenced negotiation outcomes. Even the selection of refreshments became a complex exercise in cultural diplomacy and spiritual symbolism. During actual meetings, the Sultan couldn't speak spontaneously or respond naturally to diplomatic proposals. Instead, his words had to follow carefully scripted formulas that had been reviewed by teams of advisors who considered every possible interpretation and implication. Palace interpreters weren't simply translating languages. They were managing elaborate communication protocols that treated every exchange as a potential source of cosmic significance. The psychological impact was staggering. The Sultan had to govern relationships with foreign powers while simultaneously performing for an audience of domestic officials who monitored his every gesture for signs of strength or weakness. His diplomatic effectiveness became secondary to maintaining the theatrical requirements that supposedly preserved imperial mystique and divine authority. These extraordinary traditions that governed Ottoman court life weren't simply elaborate customs or historical curiosities. They were the visible manifestation of a system that understood absolute power as a form of performance art, where legitimacy required constant demonstration and authority demanded eternal vigilance. The Sultan, who commanded the loyalty of millions and shaped the destiny of 3 continents, was himself imprisoned by the very system that elevated him above ordinary humanity. Every private moment became a public ceremony. Every personal choice became a matter of state policy. Every human need became an opportunity for displaying imperial grandeur through elaborate rituals that transformed basic activities into complex performances requiring professional management and spiritual oversight. The true horror wasn't the complexity of these traditions themselves, but their psychological impact on the individuals who lived within them. The Ottoman Sultan gained the power to determine the fate of empires, but lost the freedom to experience simple human pleasures like eating when hungry, sleeping when tired, or speaking spontaneously when moved by genuine emotion. As you emerge now from those shadowed palace corridors where we began this journey, you understand that the strange traditions of Ottoman sultans reveal something profound about the nature of absolute power itself. These elaborate rituals weren't designed to make life more comfortable or enjoyable for their rulers. Instead, they were systematic methods for transforming human beings into living symbols of divine authority, where every moment became a performance and every choice became a statement about cosmic order. The sultans, who commanded vast empires and inspired fear in European courts, were themselves prisoners of systems that demanded constant perfection, eternal vigilance, and the sacrifice of personal autonomy for the sake of imperial mystique. Their extraordinary power came at the cost of their basic humanity, creating golden cages where divine authority required the abandonment of individual freedom. These forgotten traditions remind us that throughout history, absolute power has always demanded absolute sacrifice, not just from subjects, but from rulers themselves who discovered that commanding empires meant surrendering the simple pleasures that make life worth living.